Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today we're going to be ranking all 89 artifacts in Marvel Future Fight. That's right, there's almost 100 freaking artifacts in the game. We've got them all here, and I'm going to be ranking them all. Normally, when I do these videos, I have the little artifact icons for all of them, but there's just way too many now. It takes way too long in Photoshop to crop all of them. So when you see the character's face, I'm talking about that character's artifact, okay? And this will be helpful because of the way that I've organized things here. So we have to go very fast because, like I said, there's way too many of them. If you need to know what specific artifacts do, I'm not going to mention them all. I literally cannot memorize 90 artifacts off by heart, but I'll basically do my best to explain as I'm going along where I've ranked these in the different categories. So we start things off with the bad artifacts. These artifacts are bad for one of three reasons. One, they're for a good character, but the effect of the artifact is really bad, which is the case for the characters that I'm putting here right now. The other possibility is that it's just a bad, just really bad artifact effect. Usually these are effects that trigger with a % chance, and they only trigger for a very short amount of time. This doesn't mean that the characters here are bad. Some of them are, some of them aren't, as you'll see. But it means that overall, the artifact is going to make a very low, if any, impact at all on your gameplay. Okay, so yeah, that's really the ranking for the bad options here. And as we get further along, you'll see that the characters get worse and worse because, yes, I mean, White Fox, amazing support, but yeah, terrible artifact overall. Angela's artifact is hot garbage, and so is she. Unfortunately, same thing goes for Vulture and Scourge and Moon Girl and Caecilius and Sandman, and I think we are just missing, no, I think that's everyone. Yep. Okay, so moving on from bad, we now go to mid. So for this one, the characters generally are better. It's not that they're always better, but not only are they better, but now the artifacts have a little bit more, a little fewer more effects, which makes them a little bit better. So, you know, Doctor Strange's artifact is one of the more bad artifacts in the game, but for example, he's a very strong character, so you could kind of forgive it a little bit because it adds something to an already very OP character. But generally speaking, all of the artifacts in the mid tier, although the characters themselves don't need the artifacts, these artifacts have 2 or more effects or one very strong effect, which can be valuable in certain situations. So that is what makes the mid character, the mid artifacts mid, so to speak. You are climbing up the ladder. You're not really at the top of the meta just yet, but you're somewhere in the middle, and these artifacts also have some value to them for these characters. You're going to notice an increase in their damage or an increase in their survivability, an increase in their effectiveness for whatever game mode you're using them in when you're using them with these artifacts. So that's really how it goes for these characters. Punisher's is like kind of whatever. Kingo's is okay. It's the reverse of like Makari's. You've got Elektra's is okay as well. Toxin's is pretty decent, but again, Green Goblin is one of Green Goblin and Wong are two of the only characters on the mid tier who only have one effect, but it's just attack, and it's just that both of these characters are generally speaking better than the characters here. Like for example, you know, Titania is a better character for DPS than let's say Green Goblin. Let's say. But for example, Titania's artifact has nothing to do with her best game mode, right? Titania's artifact is decreased boss damage or decreased damage reduction from non-boss enemies. That's a PvP effect. Titania is used for ABX, my dudes. So the artifact literally does nothing for her, and it's just one effect. At least in Green Goblin's case, and Wong not so much, not as much. You could probably put Wong in bad, to be honest. For Green Goblin's case, it increases his attack. Now, of course, there are better options for villain speed ABX, but increasing his attack at least increases his value in the one game mode where he is sort of meta. So that's where I'm kind of make the distinction here. We have some original artifacts as well, like Shang-Chi and Sharon Rogers, which just by today's standards are just pretty bad. Like they have not given any new artifacts the effects of increasing instinct critical rate or instinct critical damage because it's such a bad effect. Like they gave it to Thanos almost a year ago, but it's just obviously a really bad effect because they don't give it to any new characters. So generally speaking, if you see that effect on a character, you can guess, oh, Clea's supposed to be here. you can guess that it's not a very good artifact overall. We have Crescent and we have Hyperion, and that should, once we find Blade, that should wrap things up for the bad category. I had a really hard time finding Blade. Generally speaking, not a very good artifact effect. He needs to use a specific skill, and then it just buffs his attack. But these days, you know, combat class, so saturated, etc. Okay, now we get to the more interesting categories. We have the PvE meta, the PvP meta, the needs, the meta and needs artifact, support artifact, and then needs artifact. So I know it sounds a bit repetitive and messy. We'll go through it all, but I'll explain it. But basically, we start off with the needs artifact. So these characters aren't necessarily meta, but they need their artifact in order to function for what you're using them for, okay? So, for example, you know, Colossus, he kind of needs his artifact. Colossus is probably one of the worst examples, or the least relevant examples, but Hela and Wolverine and Mr. Sinister are all the same artifact. It's the Immortality artifact, and they absolutely need it if you're going to use them for PvP. It's not a question of like, oh, maybe I can. No, definitely not. At this point, there are better options for PvE speed hero than Makari, but if you're going to use Makari for ABX, she absolutely needs to have her artifact. So this is really how these artifacts break down. These characters aren't necessarily meta, but if you're going to build them for a specific game mode, in the case of both Gilgamesh and Juggernaut, that would be PvP, Alliance Conquest, things like that, they need their artifacts. It's not a question because the artifact gives them so much a value bump with the HP and the healing proc and that sort of thing. Echo is similar. You know, if you're going to build her for a speed PvP team, you're going to need that artifact because it gives her like absolute dodge, which is super clutch. Absorbing Man and Destroyer, same sort of thing. If you're going to build them as reflect characters for physical and energy reflect, their artifacts heal them when they reflect damage. That is just super important. Heimdall gets his healing from, I believe he gets his healing from his artifact as good as well as I can remember. Again, just super necessary. So these artifacts are necessary for these characters to excel in the game, but these characters are not meta. Okay, hopefully that sort of clears things up for the needs artifact category. So in general, we're getting higher and higher in terms of not only the value of the characters, but also the value of the artifacts related to the characters. So next up, we have support artifacts. These are some of the best artifacts in the game because they apply to characters and they apply support abilities. So just like we say, support characters are always useful because even though metas will come and go, new characters will get uniforms or new characters will come out and they'll get stronger than previous characters. That's always going to happen, of course. But in the meantime, support characters are always valuable because they can buff. You know, most supports will buff any character in the game or all heroes, all villains. So it still captures a large portion of your roster, which is why support artifacts are always so good, or support characters are so good, and by extension, support artifacts are good. Now, these support artifacts have been ranked, so I think Valkyrie has the best support artifact in the game, then Black Cat has the second best one, M'Baku has the third, and so on and so forth. Once you get past M'Baku, besides Nadia, all of these artifact effects are only for specific groups of characters, so be careful. Agent Venom's is only for symbiotes, She-Hulk's is only for Gamma characters, Sunbird is only for the Warriors of the Sky, only for Flame characters. This one is for all characters, but it's pretty useless because it only really applies in group settings like Alliance Conquest and maybe like Shadowland if you're somehow really desperate, because she heals the characters around her that are actively on the field, not like sitting on the bench. When she uses a skill. So it's very, very niche. It does technically apply to all allies, but you're going to use it like once in a blue moon. So yeah, these support artifacts, I would highly consider getting Valkyries, especially if you have a selector. And that's why I made this video, because I know a lot of people with Black Friday, they have 3, 4, 5, 6-star artifact selectors, and they're sort of pondering, who should I choose for it? Now we come to the more important category. This is probably the most important category. The character is meta, and they need their artifact. So in this list, I'm going to be placing characters who, if you plan to build to tier 3 or to tier 4, if you're planning to buy their newest uniform, etc., you should strongly consider getting their artifact. Without their artifact, they are going to be missing a significant chunk of either defense or damage, okay? And of course, as you go down this list from Carnage across, it gets less important. but I do want to make it clear that these characters are going to be missing a step or two if you don't have their artifact. And if they're missing that step or two, then you might be comparing their performance across different players, and you're like, hey, this guy in my alliance, he's doing these crazy scores in ABX with Wanda. How come I have the same build? I got a Rage CTP, I got the Odin's Blessings. And you're like, dog, do you have the artifact? Oh, I don't have the artifact. How come my Gore can't kill anybody in PvP? Do you have the artifact? You see what I'm saying? And it sort of gets more and more important as you go up. So this list, it can be, I think some people might disagree here, but I think this is a pretty solid list. Moon Knight's best game mode is ABX, ABL, so you kind of need the artifact. It's sort of like the Makari syndrome. Black Widow, she struggles with survivability. It definitely gets better at tier 4, but she still needs that dodge that the artifact provides. Thor is probably the least, deserving of being here. You could probably just put him up in PvE meta, but the artifact does allow you to run him with 2 supports and run his own leadership, because he converts his lightning resistance to lightning, to a lightning buff, basically an elemental damage buff, and that's what his artifact does. And it also gives him some extra damage against villains, I think, or against bosses, which is very, very good to sort of like round out his kit. So yeah, that's how this goes. This is probably the most important category. Okay, so be very careful if you are building these characters and you're not using selectors on them. Be very careful. You don't want to brick your character. Oh, I tier 4'd Carnage. I got him pure PvP build. Let's go, baby. And then you don't have the artifact and you get slapped and he gets one-shotted and you have a useless character now that you pumped all these investments into. It's very, very, it can be very, very scary if you don't properly invest. So just make sure that you do that. And then we come to the final 2 categories. Be happy, because these are the 2 categories of characters that do not need their artifact. It's very simple. These characters are meta and their artifacts are whatever, but they don't need their artifact. Whoops, we missed one here. They don't need their artifact to be meta. We actually missed a couple here. Sif's is mid. I apologize. I had Sif somewhere else entirely. Sif's artifact is kind of mid. But anyways, that's all we were missing. So yes, these characters here, Thanos and Hulk, they're meta for PvP, and you do not need their artifacts. Their artifacts absolutely help, but you can still get away with kills and stuff in PvP with Hulk without his artifact. Absolutely. Same thing goes for Thanos. Obviously, the artifacts are not going to make the character bad. That's just not possible. It can't make the character worse, but they are not necessary artifacts in order to unlock a significant amount of damage or survivability for the character. Okay, so this is basically where all of the rest of these meta characters go. And I did include Jane Foster this time around because I missed her on the must-buy uniform list. I'm covering up Miss Marvel there, but yeah, this is essentially how it works. So yeah, just to be clear, all of these artifacts are good. Some of them are going to have more value than others depending on what you're really pushing for. Some players will say that Black Bolt's artifact is necessary if you're pushing for very high ABL scores, or if you're trying to cap with a build with Namor for ABX. There are certain situations where if you're pushing for stage 99, this is like very, very high, top 0.01% of players sort of logic here. But for the vast majority of players, you're still going to get a very good 95 plus level of performance out of these characters, even without the uniform. I mean, even without the artifact, not the uniform. The artifacts do help, right? All these artifacts are good in different ways, but they are not build defining and they're not character defining, and they're not needed in the way that these ones down here are needed, and these ones down here are needed as well. And yeah, I apologize, I forgot about Cersei and Sif. Sif, not really that much to talk about. It's just increased damage to villains. Cersei's is so important. It allows her to revive, which basically is the only reason why she's relevant in PvP. So it's like, it's build and character defining. So yeah, this is the list here. Hopefully this helps you. Essentially, just to recap one more time, the way that you should read this tier list is that you can skip, I'm not saying you should skip, but you can skip the artifacts or the artifacts for characters in the first 2 rows if you're building them. If you're building the character in the 3rd row, or the 5th row, you kind of can't skip their artifacts, but obviously I would still prioritize the top 3, even though the ones in need their artifact. So if that doesn't make sense, let me explain it a different way. If I'm building Namor for PvP and I'm building, or PvE, and I'm building Makari, even though Makari needs her artifact for ABX, there are better options for ABX, like Shuri, like Miss Marvel, and like obviously Black Widow. So in that case, if you're comparing Shuri's artifact to Namor, Namor's artifact is better. Absolutely, categorically. It only really starts to matter when you get into the top 3. The top 3 categories here is where, if you're talking about between Namor and Carnage's artifact, I would say Carnage, right? Even though Namor's artifact is very good, Carnage needs that bad boy, okay? So hopefully that explains things. Hopefully that that sort of demystifies the artifacts, and it gives you some ideas on who you should be selecting with your artifact selectors. As always, if you still have questions, go to discord.gg/thenewmeta. Okay, we now have 16,371 members. We keep growing day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, and we cannot stop. So yeah, if you have any more questions, hit us up there on Discord. We always have people active to help you. Thank you so much for watching. Smash the like button, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.